Imagine transferring $100 on a random Tuesday and forgetting it exists. 30 years later, you open that account and see a number that looks impossible because you barely remember building it. No inheritance, no lucky break. Just one ordinary decision most people ignore. A small transfer that looked meaningless at the time, until decades later. Why does that gap exist? That's actually the whole video. Most people think the answer is the amount. It isn't. Ask 10 people why they haven't started investing, and 8 of them will say some version of, I don't have enough yet. But look at the data. A Federal Reserve survey found a large share of American adults can't cover a $400 emergency without borrowing. That includes people with steady jobs, cars, apartments, decent lives on the surface. Nothing underneath. So if it's not about the amount, what is it about? Because underneath every dollar you spend today, there's a fight going on that you've probably never noticed. The person who wins that fight isn't the one who tries hardest. It's the one who stops having to try at all. Why don't people save money? Not why don't poor people save? Why don't people who can afford to still don't? Someone making $6,000 a month, no kids, decent rent, and still at the end of the year, nothing saved. Why? Think about it this way. Every day you're negotiating with someone, not your boss, not your partner, yourself, but a version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. The one who's 55, who needs this month's $100 a lot more than you do right now. That version can't call you, can't argue, can't stop you from spending it on Saturday. So the present version of you wins. Every time. Unless something interrupts the negotiation. Research on retirement behavior consistently shows something surprising. People who automate saving often outperform people who simply rely on good intentions. The difference isn't always how much they earn. It's whether the decision gets made once or 1,000 times. Picture 2 coworkers, James and Mike. Same job, same $4,500 paycheck, same rent. James sets up a $100 transfer on day 1 of every month. Mike tells himself he'll save whatever is left. By December, James has $2,100 sitting untouched. Mike has the same paycheck he always had. And nothing to show for it. Nobody decided to lose that fight on purpose. It happened in November at a birthday dinner, in August on a flight upgrade, in March on a jacket that still got the tag on it in the closet. Each one alone meant nothing. So here's the actual question worth asking. If the fight is this quiet, this invisible, how does anyone ever win it? Ask someone earning $2,000 a month why they don't invest. They'll say the paycheck's too small. Now ask someone earning $6,000 a month the same question. Same answer. Different math. Now it's the mortgage, the car payment, a gym membership they signed up for in January and still pay for in October. The number went up. The excuse didn't move an inch. And that's why income alone doesn't solve this problem. A bigger paycheck only gives your habits more money to control. Here's the comparison that actually matters. Someone making $1,000 a month, working part-time, sets aside $50 every payday without fail. Someone making $10,000 a month saves nothing. Not this month, not last month, not the one before. Who's ahead? Not in dollars. Not yet. But run it forward 10 years, and the part-time worker has a habit worth 6 figures. The other one has a lifestyle worth exactly what they made, minus what they spent, which is nothing. Think about someone stocking shelves part-time, $1,400 a month, rent due on the 1st. If that person sets aside $50 and never touches it, they've already outdone most 6-figure earners walking around right now. So the real question isn't how much do you make? It's what happens to the first $50 of it every single time? Because that's not a paycheck problem. That's a permission problem, waiting for some future raise to finally unlock a habit that would have gotten you there faster in the first place. Same job, same $4,100 a month. Same 1-bedroom apartment 3 blocks apart from each other. Payday hits. For one of them, $100 leaves the account before breakfast. Automatic. Gone before it ever felt like spending money. For the other, that same $100 sits in checking. 2 weeks later, it's gone. Not to anything dramatic. A Sephora order, a DoorDash habit that costs more some months than the electric bill, a blender still in its box from Black Friday. Neither of them feels rich. Neither feels broke. Ask them both how they're doing and you'll get the same answer. Fine, getting by. But money never just disappears. It goes somewhere. For one, it becomes 4 shares of an index fund, quietly sitting there, doing nothing dramatic, doing exactly what it's supposed to. For the other, it becomes a blender nobody's used, a subscription nobody remembers signing up for, and a receipt nobody's going to look at again. Same $100, 2 destinations. And here's the part that matters. Nobody sat down and made this decision on purpose, month after month. One of them made it once, set a transfer for the first, and never touched the setting again. The other one is remaking the same decision every single payday and betting, without realizing it, that they'll choose correctly every time, forever. Do that math. 24 decisions a year. 240 over a decade. How many times does anyone go 240 for 240 with no misses? So 1 year in, they look almost identical. Same apartment, same complaints about the weather. But quietly, one of them just did something the other one is about to have to keep doing. Remember, resist and choose right for the next 9 years. Both of their cars break down, not at the same time but the same kind of Tuesday. Alternators shot. The shop quotes $600. For the one with the automatic transfer, this is annoying. Genuinely annoying. Nobody wants to spend $600 on a Tuesday, but there's $1,800 sitting in a savings account from 18 months of that same $100 habit. They transfer $600 out. Balance drops to $1,100. Cars fixed by Thursday. For the other one, there's $340 in checking and paydays 9 days out. The $600 goes on a card at 24% APR. Minimum payments over 8 months turn that $600 repair into roughly $670. Meanwhile, the electric bill waits an extra week. Same alternator. Same $600 quote. One version costs $600 and a 5-minute transfer. The other costs $670 and 8 months of a slightly smaller paycheck every time a bill's due. Here's what's easy to miss. This wasn't decided when the car broke down. It was decided 18 months earlier. Same neighborhood, same Target run on Saturdays, completely different Tuesday. So what actually decided how this Tuesday went? Not income, not luck. A decision made 18 months earlier. That had nothing to do with cars at all. Which raises the next question. If a cushion this small can absorb a $600 hit that painlessly, what happens when the number sitting in that account isn't $1,800, but something that's actually grown for 20 years? Ever notice the rush right before you buy something you didn't plan on? A jacket, a $9 latte, doesn't matter. There's a real spike happening in your brain, dopamine, firing off before you've even used the thing. Now, transfer $100 into an investment account. Feel that same rush? You don't. It's a number changing on a screen. That's it. And that gap between a jacket and a transfer decides more of your financial life than your salary does. Why does the brain do this? Economists call it temporal discounting. One study found people treat $1,000 a year from now as worth noticeably less than $1,000 today, even though it's the same $1,000. For most of human history, that made sense. Wait too long for a reward and a rival gets there first, or the food spoils, or the threat arrives before the payoff does. Your brain wasn't built for a retirement account. It was built for a savings account that lasted about a week. And you're not fighting this alone either. The average person sees over 4,000 ads a day. Nearly all of them selling something you can feel today. None of them selling a quiet transfer on the first. Nobody posts a screenshot of their brokerage account going up $40. Everybody posts the vacation. So if the fight is rigged this badly, dopamine on one side, a spreadsheet on the other, how does anyone ever win it? Not by trying harder. Willpower runs out by Thursday. You don't win with more discipline. You win by removing the need for discipline. The people who actually pull this off stopped relying on it entirely. They built something that doesn't ask them to decide ever again, which is exactly where this goes next. Because once $100 escapes that fight completely, something happens to it that has nothing to do with discipline at all. $200 a month, 10 years. What does that actually turn into? Do the math with an 8% average return, reasonable, based on decades of stock market history. And $24,000 in contributions grows to about $36,600. That's $12,600 you didn't work for. It just showed up. Still not exciting, right? Most people look at $26,000 over 10 years and shrug. Fair. This is the boring part. It's supposed to be. Now stretch it. Same $200 a month, 40 years instead of 10. Total money out of your pocket, $96,000. Total in the account, past $700,000. Read that gap again. You put in under $100,000. The account holds over $700,000. Where did the other $600,000 come from? Nowhere you can point to. No raise, no bonus, no second job. It came from the money making more money on top of money it already made the year before. This is why compounding feels invisible at first. A small balance creates small results, but the same percentage on a large balance creates a completely different reality. The percentage doesn't change. The number underneath it does. Somewhere in there is a specific month, not a metaphor, an actual point on a calendar, where the account's growth for the year outpaces what you put in yourself. Before that point, you're the one doing the work. After it, the money is. And someone who starts this at 25 isn't just 10 years ahead of someone who starts at 35 in deposits. They're 10 years ahead in how long the money had to compound, which ends up being worth hundreds of thousands of dollars by 65 purely from the extra time the money had to work. So what actually made the difference between $36,600 and $700,000? Not the monthly amount, not the return rate, just time. And whether you started the clock now or in 5 years, still waiting to feel ready. Month 1, opening that account feels like a chore. You check the balance, $200, exactly what you put in. Underwhelming. Month 14, you check again. Out of habit now. Not excitement. And the number's a little higher than you expected. Not life-changing. Just more. Something small happens right there. A flicker of something that feels a lot like pride. That flicker wasn't there in month 1. Here's what actually shifts after that. You stop checking whether you can afford to save this month. You just assume you will. The $200 stops feeling like a sacrifice and starts feeling like the one part of your finances that's actually working. A pattern shows up in people who track this consistently, even informally. Their savings rate tends to climb on its own, without anyone telling them to save more. Nobody sat them down for a talk. Watching the number grow did the convincing. So somewhere between month 8 and month 20, something quiet happens. You didn't decide to become an investor. You just noticed one Tuesday that you were one, not a label you gave yourself. A label that fit because of what you'd already been doing without thinking about it for over a year. And here's the part worth sitting with. That fight from earlier, between the version of you who wants comfort today and the one who needs security later. It gets a lot quieter around this point. Not because you got stronger, because they finally want the same thing. But the balance doesn't stay this easy to build. It runs into something new the moment it's big enough to notice, which is exactly the problem the next $200 has to solve. Open your bank statement right now, not later. Right now, if you're near your phone. Scroll through the recurring charges. There's a $14.99 line item for something you signed up for during a free trial 8 months ago. A $12 streaming app you haven't opened since spring. Car insurance you've paid the same rate for since you got the policy, never once calling to check if a competitor's cheaper. And a 10-minute call could easily knock $40 off that bill. Now check the closet. Something bought at 40% off, tags still on, worn 0 times. That's not a purchase. That's $60 that already left and came back as nothing. Between the forgotten subscriptions and the never-worn jacket, most people find $150 without cutting anything that actually matters to them. Need the rest? 2 hours a week freelancing something you already know how to do closes the gap, but finding the $200 was never the hard part. Here's the actual test. Can you find it again in March, in July, in month 11 when there's a wedding to go to and money's tight? If the answer depends on you remembering and choosing correctly every single time, you already know how that ends. Not because you're weak, because nobody wins that many coin flips in a row. So don't rely on remembering. Set up a transfer for the exact day your paycheck lands, before the money sits in your account long enough to feel like yours to spend. That's the whole move. Not more discipline, fewer decisions. Think about what that actually removes. There's no moment on payday where you're standing at a fork in the road, tempted, having to talk yourself into the right choice. The choice already happened back when you set it up, thinking clearly with no temptation in front of you. Now it just runs. That's the difference between a habit and a system. A habit needs you every single time. A system works even when you're tired, distracted, or having a bad month. One more shift, and this is the one that actually locks it in. Stop calling that $200 whatever's left over. Call it rent. Nobody skips rent because they're not in the mood. The moment your transfer has that same status in your head, non-negotiable, just due, this entire thing stops depending on your mood. Ever again. You're standing in line about to buy a $60 pair of shoes. Normal Tuesday, normal purchase. Except a new thought shows up, uninvited. What does $60 turn into if I don't spend it? Run it. At 8%, that $60 becomes about $280 in 20 years. You didn't ask for that thought. It just showed up. Because some part of your brain has been quietly doing this math for months now, without you telling it to. That's the actual shift. Not a personality change. Just a half-second pause that wasn't there a year ago. And it doesn't stay in the checkout line. Someone offers you a promotion with more hours and barely more pay. A year ago, maybe you take it because you need whatever you can get. Now, you actually run the numbers and say no, because you know exactly what the current arrangement is quietly building toward, and it's worth more than the extra $200 a month they're offering. A friend mentions a business idea needs $3,000 to get it off the ground. A year ago, you'd have said, sounds cool, and moved on because $3,000 wasn't sitting anywhere. Now you can actually consider it. Your landlord raises rent $150 a month. A year ago, panic. Now, you check the numbers and realize you can absorb it for now or start looking. Either way, it's a decision, not an emergency. None of this happened because you got a raise. It happened because a number sitting quietly in an account gave you room to say no to things and yes to things that weren't available to you before. Which brings up the actual question underneath all of this. What does that number get you say no to 20 years from now that you can't say no to today? Same 2 coworkers, James and Mike. 30 years later. One of them, 60 now, still clocks in at a similar job. Not because they love it, because every better option got turned down along the way. A smaller company offered a role at 20% less pay in their 40s, real upside, and the answer was no, couldn't risk it. A friend's business needed $5,000 to get off the ground, and the answer was no, didn't have it sitting anywhere. The other one took that smaller company's offer. There was $180,000 in an account by then. A 20% pay cut for a year wasn't a threat. It was a trade. They put $5,000 into that friend's business because for once, $5,000 wasn't the whole safety net. At 52, they covered half their kids' $40,000 down payment. At 60, retirement isn't a cliff they're staring down. It's a door that unlocked itself a decade ago. Here's what should actually bother you about this. Neither of them was smarter. Neither got a lucky break the other one missed. For 29 of those 30 years, you couldn't have picked either one out of a lineup. Same car. Roughly. Same complaints about gas prices. Run the numbers from the compounding section earlier, and the entire gap traces back to $200 a month, moved automatically, starting 3 decades earlier. Not a bonus, not an inheritance, a transfer set up once. On a random Tuesday, nobody would have thought to remember. So, which Tuesday was that? The one that quietly decided which of these two people someone would become? And more importantly, has yours already happened, or is it still sitting there, unscheduled? Picture that same person from the beginning, Tuesday, transferring 100 Ds, forgetting about it for 20 years. By now you know what was actually happening in that moment. Not a math trick, not luck, just one decision made once that 1,000 future decisions never had to be made again. 10 years from now, you won't remember where $200 went if you'd spent it this month. A pair of shoes, a delivery order, something on sale that still got the tag on it. Gone, folded into a year that looks exactly like every other year. Your account will remember, though, every single deposit whether you were paying attention or half asleep when it happened. $96,000 in, over $700,000 out, 40 years from now. Or $24,000 in, $36,600 out in 10. It doesn't run on your mood. It just runs. You don't need a bigger paycheck to end up on the right side of this. You need one transfer set up on one ordinary day that removes the need to fight yourself every month. The biggest financial victories don't come from making better decisions every day. They come from designing a life where the right decision happens automatically. Because 30 years from now, looking back, it was never about the $200. It was about that Tuesday. So here's the only 3 steps that matter. Pick a number, automate it, leave it alone for 12 months. Because the person you become 30 years from now is built by the decisions you stop having to make today. If you see your money differently after this, subscribe. The next video is about the decisions that quietly separate people who build wealth from people who only earn more.